when I was 16, I experienced a kind of metaphorical death. And I wasn't a deep person at that time. I didn't read a lot. I was in the theater, and I was interested in music, theater, and girls.
Sidi, it's such an honor and pleasure to see you and to have this conversation and chat.
Yeah, it's always a pleasure to see you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Sidi, tell us a little bit about show business.
Show business. Well, I'm out of show business, but I started when I was young in the theater, when I was quite young. I was very experienced, relatively experienced to my peers because I'd started so young. And done so many things. I did musical theater. I was interested in folk music, which is related to theater because it's storytelling.
Right.
Folk music I love folk music. I think it's just extraordinary form. And I became very disenchanted with show business. I loved the theater. I loved the art form.
Not the art form, but the business side
exactly.
of the industry.
And I love film. I think film is one of the great art forms of our time.
And you were in some of these films, right?
I was in some. When I don't want to get into
humble.
it. No, I'd say justifiably humble. You know, I was in the show business for a couple of years and was appalled, basically, by what it's about. You know, by the lifestyle, by the insecurity of it, the focus on youth. I saw for some reason, I was able to sort of look 30 years in advance and see where I'd probably end up as an older person, rather than focus on becoming famous and celebrated and all of that. I was talented and I had some success in one form or another, but I really didn't. I didn't want to continue in that lifestyle, and this coincided with a kind of spiritual crisis that I went through. Which was precipitated actually by I fell ill, and I was ill for about 6 months. I lost my voice, and I had an infection on my vocal cords, and so and what that left me with myself. And I realized I had no wisdom and no knowledge. I had this sort of talent and skill set, but that was it. And I started reading books on meditation and mind control because my mind was just running away with me. I was stuck with myself. And that kind of started things. But even before that, when I was about 16, I had, and I'm writing some of these experiences in a book that I'm working on right now.
Your new
Tauba,
book?
Yeah, on Tauba. When I was 16, I experienced a kind of metaphorical death. And I wasn't a deep person at that time. I didn't read a lot. I was in the theater, and I was interested in music, theater, and girls, basically, and not necessarily in that order either. So I was a teenager. I was, and suddenly one night I experienced dying. I lost my hearing, my seeing, my smell, my ability to move, and this was an experience that probably took place over a matter of less than a minute, but it was as if time had stopped. And I looked into an abyss, and when I lost my breath, I was in a sort of an abyss, and I remember saying to myself, "Who am I? If I'm not all these things, who am I?" And I was very, very panicked. And when I came out of this, I was so disoriented that I got up and I looked in a mirror to see if I still existed. And that haunted me, that experience. And I broached the subject to my parents. And I thought maybe, they would say something like, oh, well, this happens to everybody. When you're 16, you go through this. But it actually disturbed them. They didn't know how to respond. And I had a girlfriend at the time, and I broached the subject to her, and she was just blank. So I was kind of alone. And that experience kind of hovered over me and haunted me for many years until, in fact, I became a Muslim, and then I began to understand these things.
When was that?
When I was 16.
When you became a Muslim when you were 16?
No. When I became a Muslim when I was about 22 or 23. So that period, and that was a period also that I was very, very ambitious. I wanted to be successful, and I won awards as a singer and as an actor.
Yes, that's right, because you're classically trained, right?
Yeah, I was classically trained as a singer. But I was very interested, I won a very prestigious award at the university, and the arranger for Frank Sinatra was one of the judges, and he came to me after, and I'd done this very eclectic set, and he came to me after that, and because he could see that I didn't know where I was going,
sure.
And he said, came up to me, he said, "You're a folk singer." And I was insulted by this. I thought, I'm classically trained and all of that. But he kind of saw that that's where my strength was. But I was a cocky, stupid kid, and I didn't take him seriously. But that was very insightful, because storytelling is something that I feel very close to, and it's what I've ended up doing, basically, is telling stories and in various forms.
Your book was I was really affected by your book. And in part, this whole thing, this reflections and this idea of, getting people together and talking, having a chat, effectively just having a conversation, in part is due to your book, because you were introducing these unbelievable people, saintly human beings that, one would assume lived 1,000 years ago or somewhere. You think you'd be reading, hearing about them. They existed, in the biblical times, as you also allude to in your book. This is the book, Signs on the Horizons. It's an incredible book. I recommend, I'm plugging it because I love it. I recommend everyone get it, check it out. It's a beautiful book. Incredible stories. One of the stories I really loved was the beggar.
Yes.
The beggar, the faqir, who was, faqir means someone spiritually, how would you translate faqir?
Faqir is...
spiritually poor, impoverished,
a poor man.
spiritually,
A faqir is someone who's
poor for God.
Yeah, exactly.
So he is actually a spiritual faqir, but also physically as well. He's literally a beggar, and he had a beggar's card.
Yeah.
Could you talk about this? This was in Morocco, right? So you went to Morocco.
Yes, I went with a group of people like myself, and
When was this?
This was in about 1970, starting in 1973, I think, 72, 1973, and we went together, and I was completely clueless. I had just become a Muslim, and I really didn't know anything, to be honest, and. But associating with these people, coming into contact with them, completely transformed the way I looked at the world and looked at existence, because they didn't care about anything except remembering God. I've come to the conclusion that the only value that we have, that we can generate, is in our remembrance of God. إِلَّا بِذِكْرِ اللَّهِ تَأَطْمَئِنُّ الْقُلُوبُ. And in the remembrance of God, the heart becomes, the hearts become serene. And that was something that was very important to me. There were people when I was entering Islam who were saying, had all these very high aspirations, or they were, at least they voiced those kinds of aspirations. And I remember saying, I just want peace. That's really what I want. I don't want to be disturbed. I want to attain a sense of peace. And the only way that I've ever had any access to peace is through remembrance. I can't, at this stage in my life, it's an addiction for me. I mean, I feel physically ill if I don't do remembrance, dhikrullah. And if you think about it, everything in Islam it relates to dhikrullah. If you're making hajj and you're not remembering Allah, then you're just going through motions. If you're making the salat and you're not remembering Allah, then you're just bobbing up and down and doing physical rituals and things. So everything relates to remembrance of Allah, and that's what. And I understood this as an actor when I was young. I immediately understood this because actors don't talk about this. You find all these people acting in the U.S. and probably everywhere in the world is a very, very insecure profession. Most people are out of work all the time. You think of the big movie stars and they're working and you see them all the time. But most people are really struggling just to have a job. And so why do they do it? It's really not such a great profession.
Why do they do it?
And I'll tell you why. It's as any artist, you've experienced this as a singer, I have no doubt, in your own way. And painters experience it, and writers definitely experience it. But there's a moment when you're struggling with a character. You become a character. You don't have it. You're saying the lines. You're going through the motions. You're walking through it. But you do it over and over and over and over again. And what happens is that if you're talented and if you have, if you have something, one moment you become the character. You become the character.
Right.
And people can see it even though you're physically the same, you're doing the same thing, and then suddenly you're the character and you have it, you nail it. And it happens sometimes in 1 second. It can happen in just a second. You've got it.
Is that method acting?
You can call it whatever you want. I mean, Stanislavski, who was, credited with founding the idea of method acting, used to give his students or his actors meditation, like yogic meditation exercises, so they would meditate on the characters. Right. Just before they slept, so that these meditations would sink in to the being. And so, I mean, this is one of the things that keeps actors in the game, because every once in a while that happens, and when it happens, everything works, and you have the character, and people see that you've got the character, and everything works. And it's, excuse me for saying this, is better than drugs. Right. It's like really, really, it's like intoxicating.
Euphoria.
It's euphoric when you get that. So I understood this idea that if you invoke something and you repeat something, in France, rehearsals are called répétition, repeating. It's the repetition of something that allows that quality to sink in. But I began to have a problem in the theater because all the great characters are deeply, deeply flawed. So I always wanted to play Iago, in Othello, who is like utterly evil, and he's a horrible person, and he does terrible things, and it's a great character, but you have to contemplate these things. And I went through a kind of a silly period where I thought, oh, well, we can have a theater that's like all benign. Of course, if you do that, it's very boring because, there's no drama, there's no conflict. It's all about, leaving aside all of these passions and envy and jealousy and hatred and rage and all the things that make the theater interesting. So I understood this concept of dhikr, and this is what drew me into Islam,
Yes.
because I didn't know anything about Islam when I became a Muslim, except that it involved this central act of remembering God and repeatedly invoking God.
Sidi, when is your next book? And what's it about?
The next book is, I'm working on a book on Tawbah. And this came out of actually doing tours, sort of touring around and doing book readings and meeting a lot of young Muslims. Because I'm actually I'm kind of a reclusive a little bit.
Yes.
So I don't meet a lot of young Muslims normally. And when I was doing these book readings, I met a lot of young Muslims. And one of the things that I discovered, how insecure young Muslims have become. And I think it's because of the warped theology that has dominated Islam over the last 30 years, which conflates sin with disbelief, with kufr. And, I had so many young people, sort of confiding in me and, telling me about bad things they did when they were in high school,
Right.
and I said, how old are you? I'm 35. And you're still hanging on to something you did when you were 17? Because they had no idea what tawbah is.
Yes.
And their concept of tawbah really has been received from, the Salafi kind of interpretation of Islam or Christianity.
Tawbah is the Arabic word, loosely translated
as repentance. But actually, in its etymological form, and I'm not an expert in this, but it means to turn.
Right.
To turn to God, and so it's a much more active word. And the Prophet ﷺ said, there are two hadith. One has him saying that I make tawbah 70 times a day, and another hadith says he says I make tawbah 100 times a day. And Dhul-Nun al-Misr said that the tawbah is incumbent upon everyone, including the awliya, the saints, but their tawbah is turning to God, away from the world. And so the sin of a saint would be forgetfulness, forgetting God for a second, and he's making tawbah. So it's a constant process, and that's what Islam is. Islam is repetition. We go back to the same thing.
I remember one sage saying, using the term holy monotony. Mm-hmm. Like a holy, it's beautiful.
Yeah,
and it's monotone, it's monotonous, but there's a sanctity to it. There's a sacredness to it.
One of the people that I talk about in the book who's still alive, who I adore. His name is Sidi Ali, and he's blind, and he's the caretaker of a zawiya in Morocco. And Sidi Ali, whenever I visit him, he's 80 now. And I've known him for 45 years. So I knew him, and I joke with some of the young people around him. I say, I knew him when he was shabab, he was a kid. And he laughs about this. But he has done the same thing every day for the last 50 years. And he's blind. His life is very, very narrow. It's monotonous. I mean, it's actually shockingly monotonous. But a friend of mine stayed in his room all night recently, and he wrote to me. He said, "Wallahi, Haroon, he didn't sleep at all. He was doing dhikr the whole night, but his life is absolutely. He's officially miskeen. He's the one that you referred to. He's officially poor, so that he has the permission to beg. He has nothing, but he's memorized the Quran." You know, he's
blind.
He's blind, and he had partial sight when I first knew him, but he lost everything, all of his sight. And he's a very great man inwardly, but his outward life is, as you said, utterly monotonous. It's I can't imagine myself. I mean, we travel, we see things, we meet different people. He's in the same place, doing the same thing every day. And maybe he'll go to his village once in a while or visit a wali or something, but that's it. And there's a great benefit in that. And we live in this incredibly sort of modern world that has
obsessed with change and new things and latest thing, the latest gadget,
trying out new things, and it is what it is. It's our world. I can't pretend to be living in his world,
yes.
But there's something. There's a great benefit in that if you're able to do that, and I think that the sameness of, and this is why we repeat things. We pray 5 times a day. Ibn al-Arabi. I was reading advice to a disciple. There's a wonderful translation that I found, and what his advice to disciples was incredibly strange. I mean, people see him as this great sort of mystic, which he was, but his life was very, very narrow, his outward life. I mean, it consisted of praying all the sunnah prayers, all the nawafil prayers. And he was saying, you do this, you do that, and doing an enormous amount of dhikr Allah every day, day in and day out, and day in and day out. So his life was confined by the Sharia, and that's what liberated him. That confinement, you know. So. So
fascinating.
Yeah. So anyway, this book came out of, or the book idea came out of that, and a number of stories of some very great people who started. You know,
we're talking about Tawbah, right?
The book on Tawbah.
Right.
The book is called Heart's Turn. And there's some beautiful stories of people who have done bad things in their lives and have reached salvation and had a transcendent experience that took them out of these things. And what I've done is mix those stories with stories from the ancient texts, like the Tadhkirat al-Awliya, the memorials of the saints, of Attar and Hujwiri and some of the classical stories, because half of those stories, well, I would say maybe 30 to 40% of those stories are stories of conversion. Conversion either from not being a Muslim to becoming a Muslim and then becoming a saint, or being a very bad Muslim, like a sinner. Fudayl ibn Iyad was a highwayman. He killed people, he robbed people, and he became one of the greatest saints of his time. Bishr al-Hafi was an alcoholic. He was a stone drunkard, and he became the spiritual mentor of Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal. You know, because of his intense spirituality, and he had this great, you know. So I'm retelling those stories.
This is amazing. When is it coming out?
Well, I hope by mid-year. I was hoping I'd be able to finish the book by the end of this year, but I have so many interviews that I'm doing with different people. And it's finding them, getting them, tracking them down, and then sitting with them.
Well, I hope this one comes out really soon.
Inshallah.
Sidi, will you come back for a chat?
Of course.
Next time?
I'd be very happy to.
Before we finish, could you give us a few final words for reflection?
Oh. Well, what I would say is what I've been saying through this. If you're a Muslim, remember Allah. And if you're a non-Muslim, remember God. everything comes from God. Everything is from Allah, and that's not a kind of like an adage. That's reality. People have to see that they have no power and they have no strength except from God, and being close to God and being close to the divine is what gives us a sense of peace and happiness. What we were talking about, Din al-Ihsan, the Rasul alayhi salatu wasalam said that Ihsan is to worship Allah as if you saw Him. For while you do not see Him, surely He sees you. And it's that sense that Allah is there,
Yes.
seeing us, that is the source of peace. It gives you a sense of peace.